January 21st, about 11 p.m. I'm a couple hundred feet from my house, and you hear it going off in the background right now. Kind of sounds weird. Kind of sounds doggish, hyena-ish, but you can hear it going off in the background right now. It's really kind of strange, just to say the least. It's been going off for about 15-20 minutes so far by the fire station. And it's pretty crazy, so if you can listen, that'd be crazy. Hold on. I mean, that almost sounds like laughter. It's actually gotten closer since it started. It's probably only 200 feet, 300 feet from me right now. I don't know what it is or what that is going off right there. You can hear it. I mean, I've seen foxes and coyotes around here for a long time, and I'm not sure why, if foxes and coyotes have been around here that long, why we wouldn't have heard them before. And all of a sudden, since November, things have been just going crazy around our community. Pretty sure my friend who's doing a documentary on Bigfoot will enjoy this footage. That was a gunshot. Somebody just shot over into the woods.
What is up, everybody, and welcome to my channel. The acronym stands for Retired Music Executive Reacts. Kind of shorten that down to the little acronym that I have now, but as you could read on there, it's reaction, reviews, and originals. And for some time, ever since I first started this channel, it was all reactions, but I wanted to kind of broaden it just a little bit. So I released my first original last week as of this date, which is the 28th of February, 2023, and following up with another original of a story that I find extremely fascinating, have since I could remember, and as you can tell by the opening, where I'm leaning towards is a topic that I hope that you enjoy. So, if this is your first time here, I need to get better at saying this, but if this is your first time here, feel free to like, subscribe, comment. I always try to answer every comment. If there's something that you think like, wow, that effing sucked, or wow, you could do that better, let me know what's up. Just tell me, because I don't want to be that guy on YouTube that, man, his content sucks. No, I want to get some feedback, so that helps me. wanted to do a collab with somebody, and they never really said anything about it. So no collab there. I thought, it would have been a cool, little combo. I know there's a lot of collabs, going on, over Zoom and all that. But I thought it would be a cool little, different type of personality, different type of outtake to certain topics, whether it be music, whether it be true crime, whether it be paranormal, demonology, ufology, cryptics. I mean, you name it. I'm into it all. Also, corrupted cops, body cam footage, things like that, accidents. I mean, you name it. I don't like to see anything gory, and I will not click on anything that has to do about animals being abused or hurt. Now, I'm not against hunting. I understand hunting completely, but I am not going to watch, these people saying that they're rescuing these poor little animals when I know that there's been such fabrication behind, all those bullshit videos, for people to feel bad and, for them to garner money and attention. And yeah, I cannot watch anything bad about, poor animals. Other than that, like I said, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the video. So let me hop right into this, and like I said, thank you for clicking on the page, and hope you enjoy it. So many of you may be informed or aware of the name Skinwalker. It became very synonymous and popular amongst the paranormal community back in the early to mid 1990s. One of the reasons why, and I truly believe so, is because of a book that was published called The Skinwalker Ranch by, I believe his name was Colin Callard and George Knapp. Now, if you guys think that name kind of sounds familiar, George Knapp is co-host of Coast to Coast AM. Great show if you love topics of the, fringe topics, paranormal, ufology, ancient aliens, things of that nature. It is a great show, in my opinion, and it was started by the late, great Art Bell, who actually had on-the-air conversations with about one of the stories I have posted here on my website when he jumped ship and did his own show called Gray Matter, and got a call back from his producer, and they went ahead and did the story about what had happened. And like I said, you could find it on my video list when you go through. But Skinwalker, and Skinwalker Ranch in particular, the name derives from excuse me here, I'm so sorry. The name derives from Navajo. It was the Navajo people who coined the term Skinwalker, and in fact, in their native language, and I know I'm going to butcher it, but it's pronounced Inoladoshi, which means he who was on all fours. So the problem is if you're not Navajo, a lot of people who are Navajo and who have the information and who know about this type of creature, if it does indeed exist, don't talk about it. And especially with outsiders, they will never talk about it. You're really hard pressed to find real, true, accurate information on what skinwalkers are all about. Popular belief is that the skinwalkers were a form of shamans who could take the form of many types of animals. Probably the meaning being, he who is on all fours. You get a lot of people saying, okay, I spotted this weird looking coyote, this weird looking wolf, this, weird looking bear, things of that nature. But the way they sound is nothing like you would expect. In fact, it is quite a different sound. And so when you see the introduction, that is of a gentleman, and I tried to research up and down and couldn't find, but they're on a reservation. That's where he is recording that information, or that video from, before you hear those gunshots go off. That is on a reservation. I've heard foxes before. I've heard mountain lions. I've heard you name it. I have property out in Grand Lake, Colorado. Um, we used to have a beautiful, big, beautiful cabin, but it got burned down a couple of summers ago. There was a fire up there, and it's right by Rocky Mountain National Park, and so I lost the cabin. But our idea of going, camping was, hey, let's go to the cabin. And when you hear foxes and stuff, it kind of sounds similar when they make that screaming sound like that, and mountain lions. But the sound it makes after it sounds like this guy shot it. Now, mind you, they're in the dark, so he had to pepper it, meaning a shotgun. I seriously doubt he would have got it with the rifle unless he had some type of NVGs, night vision goggles, or heat-seeking type of scope. But you could hear it sounds like he hits it, and the sound that it lets out is nothing like a fox would sound. Absolutely nothing. So I wanted to give you another example here of people who believe what some of these skinwalkers may sound like, and this is a very good example. So Skinwalker Ranch. In the 1970s, reports first started coming out about UFOs in the Uintah Basin of Utah. That is the general vicinity in which Skinwalker Ranch is located. Skinwalker Ranch is approximately 515 acres of land that is prime for, many type of farming resources, things of that nature. Now, the story begins where, and this is just the name that they used. This is not their real names because they never wanted their real names to be publicized, but they call them the Sherman family. Purchased a property for a very low amount to residents who had lived there for over 60 years. While they were going through the process of purchasing this ranch, the Shermans raised Black Angus cattle. Now, as you can imagine, Black Angus cattle are worth a ton of money, and that's their livelihood. And he had about, I believe it was close to 20 heads of cattle, and continuing, to expand on that. But as they were finalizing the purchase, they couldn't believe that they were getting such a good deal on this property. The previous owners said, just whatever you do, don't dig. It's kind of like, don't dig, didn't really think much of it. That was that. Almost immediately upon moving in, they started experiencing some weird phenomena around the ranch. Not just limited to cryptids, but almost everything and anything that you could think of, which then led to the explosion of multimedia, TV shows, movies. Joe Rogan even covered it on one of his podcasts. I mean, it just became extremely popular, with tons of people going up there to just get a glimpse, almost like when the government didn't want to, they didn't want to admit the existence of Area 51 when it's clearly right there, and then they finally admit the existence. Well, people had been testing their luck going up there right to the point to where it says, we will, shoot if you cross this line. Of course, it's not that big, when you're approaching Skinwalker Ranch, but there's signs, barbed wire, cameras, everything posted now to this date when going to Skinwalker Ranch. And I believe there is a History Channel show chronicling the new owner and what has been going on at this ranch. So some of the things that first started was a sighting of a cryptid. Now, if you guys are familiar with Game of Thrones, then you're familiar with the dire wolf. That is what they call the sigil of the Stark family, was the dire wolf. Dire wolves were actually real, for those who may not have known that, but they were around during the Ice Age, with saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, you name it. And they were reported to be about 400 to 500 pounds. So, I mean, you're talking about a large adult, full-grown wolf. is probably 150 to 170 pounds. So this thing was, 3 times as big. Rather large. Of course, nobody's ever seen one live, but what Mr. Sherman and his sons seen that day could only be described as a dire wolf after he explained this to some scientists, which are later on in the story. But what had happened was, as he's driving around the ranch, they're working on, posts and putting together, their barbed wire fences, so the cattle wouldn't, get past certain points. And as they're going through a certain part of the ranch, now mind you, there are certain parts of this ranch that where people have experienced a lot more traumatic events than in other parts. This just happened to be one of those parts of the ranch that him and his son come upon this, which could only be described as a dire wolf, coming out of the tree line in tall grass, and just gently and modestly, just walking along like, carefree, not a care in the world. Said it's about maybe 20 yards away from them, and it acknowledges their presence but doesn't snarl, doesn't growl or whatever. And at this point they look over at their cattle, and the cattle are all, they push themselves back into one corner of the pen that they were in. And so, of course, this automatically worries Mr. Sherman. He at the time had his son go and grab a 30-06 and a 44 Magnum, I believe it was. But I know it was a 30-06 for sure. But the Magnum, he didn't have on him exactly at that time. But he was just kind of prepared, because he's like, if this thing tries to break through, or hops over the fence and tries to eat one of the cattle, I'm gonna have to take it down. Well, this wolf-like creature is just sniffing around, not really doing much, and a smaller cattle goes pretty close to where this wolf is at, and out of nowhere, he said it was just as fast as lightning that he was able to fit the cattle's full head in his mouth and was able to pick him up with just his neck and thrash him about. And we're talking about a Black Angus cow here that is an adolescent. I don't know how much. I'm guessing maybe 500, 600, 700 pounds. But I mean, and that's probably even putting it lightly. To pick up that much weight and just to thrash it about with zero problems is just unbelievable to me. So he goes on and he starts to shoot at it with the 30-06. It immediately lets go, but it doesn't get aggressive with Mr. Sherman at all. It goes back for the cattle, which the cattle at this point is traumatized as shit, which I could imagine. You're about to get eaten, and then all of a sudden, you're let go, and you're just standing there, and the wolf was able to grab him again, not as violently this time. And this is where Mr. Sherman unloaded a couple of rounds of 44 Magnums. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with guns, 44 Magnum's a pretty big-ass round. I mean, you're talking about probably almost the size of a shotgun shell. Not quite that big, but, pretty damn big and powerful. And when he shot at it, that's when it finally stopped and started to kind of yield, given that all of a sudden it seemed to be injured, and it started to bleed, but not profusely, just bleed a little bit. And he shot it again, and without any aggression, the wolf just turned around and walked the way it came, back into the tree line, never to be seen again. And they check on the cattle. The cattle was okay. The cattle went back to doing what they were doing, just grazing. And that was the start of many, many things to come. So here you're going to see some examples of people who believe they caught skinwalkers on their cell phones and sharing maps of their locations of where these were reportedly captured. And this was uploaded originally to Reddit. The narration is by a paranormal channel that goes by Sir Spooks. Very interesting channel, so you guys should go check him out. But here we go. Almost sounds like he's laughing in a way. Not only that, it is extremely pixelated. I mean, what is he recording this on a potato phone? I mean, he has nice enough of an app, but I mean, that is way too pixelated to make an educated guess on if this. I mean, you don't see an animal acting like that perhaps unless it has rabies, but it almost sounds like he's laughing at the end. So maybe one of his friends just goofing around. Okay, now that one. So a lot of purported skinwalkers, when they've heard them yell, will say that it almost sounds like a human voice, but more animalistic and more angry, such as this. So this, I would tend to believe. There's no visual proof of it, but the audio portion of it is absolutely on par with what has been reported before. See, I still hear laughing in the background, so it sounds like maybe perhaps they're just having a laugh, and that's fine, you know, kids being kids. But you know, if you're going to feature something like this, you got to be skeptical. So I would tend to lean to the point of that being completely 100% fake. Everything except for the sound of something yelling with that animalistic human-like sound. The rest of them, I really wouldn't. It's just too pixelated. And I mean, this was recorded, 10 months ago. Oh, what the hell? I'm looking at the wrong thing. So 3 years ago. Even then, the camera phones were, pretty good. So, yeah. Anyways, if you're into the paranormal type of topics, go check out Mr. Sir Spooks. He has a lot of cool videos up on his page. Now, as I started off, I told you that was just going to be one of the incidences that had taken place on this Skinwalker ranch. Some other incidences that took place, and I'm going to try to be, go in order here of just how the book had outlined it. But Mrs. Sherman, the caretaker more or less of the home, housewife, whenever she would go grocery shopping, she would come home and put all the groceries away, that she bought for the week. She would then go, the bathroom, go to the room, another room or whatever, come back, and all the groceries were piled back on the table. For no explainable reason how that could possibly happen. Things begin to go missing, like her hairbrush, makeup, clothing, things of that nature would start going missing on her. And then what also started happening was, I believe they had a daughter, and I know there was a son. There may have been more than just 2 kids. It could have been 3. But each and every one of them started to have their own paranormal experiences in the house, where they would hear, loud knocking. They would hear, footsteps throughout the night as if somebody was walking, right, in the room with them. They even had close to poltergeist activity of scratches, of counters being opened, cupboards being open all the way, dishes being broken. So Mr. Sherman decided that it would be best for him and the rest of the family to all sleep in the living room together. And that's what they started to do. Because now, first they see this wolf, now they're experiencing this paranormal activity in the homestead. And so they're just waiting to find out if this is it, or if something more is, about to come. Mind you, again, he is raising cattle, Black Angus cattle. That's their livelihood. And this is where the story definitely takes a turn for the worse for the Shermans. So one day, as they're going along, taking head counts of the cattle, marking them and everything, one of the younger cattle, they had marked, and they had driven about maybe half a mile to three-quarter mile away, and all of a sudden, and I can't recall if it was a sound that they heard or what it was, but they turned back to go and search for this cattle, and they found it completely mutilated. Now, it was drained completely of its blood. No blood on the ground whatsoever. Its eyes, rectum, genitals, everything was taken from it with precision cuts. Wasn't as if, this was attacked by some type of animal to where you would see, bite marks or anything. It looked like it was either done with, an extremely hot laser-like device or extremely sharp scalpel, but to absolutely leave zero blood anywhere, no evidence of blood whatsoever, is what really freaked them out. And then they started to notice a few more of their cattle going missing. In total, he lost about 4 cattle. Now, at the time, I don't know what the inflation now would be for a head of cattle, but let me take a look here. So you're talking about roughly $1,500 to $2,000 per head of cattle for a bull. For just a regular cow, you're talking about $1,200 to $900. Adjust for inflation, of course, it's a little bit more now these days. But this was the Sherman's livelihood on this ranch, and all of a sudden their cattle start going missing without any explanation. One of the more odd occurrences happened one day when he was out on the ranch, and they had been seeing these weird... Now, when it comes to orbs in the paranormal world, I really don't believe in orbs. They say it's the easiest form of energy to take on, so they're little balls of energy that represent, some type of haunting. I personally have never believed in orbs, just because, to me, there's really no backing for it, but to each their own. But the orbs that the Shermans had seen weren't exactly like your, paranormal orbs. These were like if they were scanning, if they were made of some type of metal that were orange reddish color and a blue one. And they see these around the property and have no idea what the hell they are or what the hell is going on or what they're doing. And so they go to check on their cattle, and all their cattle are gone. All of them missing. So they're like, oh shit. Did they break through the fence? Did they go into, their neighbor's yard? So Mrs. Sherman had went to the neighbors to find out, and mind you, the neighbors, they're all well split apart pretty wide. Had wanted to find out if any of the cows had wandered, or, cows or the bulls had wandered over there, which they didn't. They searched for hours and couldn't find anything whatsoever. And off of just sheer luck, they opened this trailer. Now, this trailer is meant to haul maybe 4 cattle at the most. Somehow, some way, they can't explain how, but nearly 15 heads of cattle fit inside of this trailer, and they were all like if they were in a trance of some sort, he reported. He then said once he opened that trailer door, about maybe 20 seconds later, they all kind of came to and started kicking and moving around, and pretty much destroyed the trailer trying to get out. but they all got out safely. And it was just mind-boggling. How in the hell did all these cattle fit into this trailer? So now he's beginning to worry, because at this point he's lost 5 head of cattle, and his livelihood, his money is at stake. All these weird happenings going on are just getting more and more strange. One of the final straws was at night, and even during the daytime, they could see what they would describe almost as like a portal opening, to where you could essentially see on the other side something that he couldn't describe, but objects were flying in and out, back and forth, to observe the land, to just come in and then fly off wherever, it decided to want to go. They started to see more and more cryptid type animals that would almost be described as Bigfoots, gray aliens. Top of that, you still have the paranormal activity that's going on in the home. But one of the last straws were he had 2 very loyal dogs. And me being a dog lover, I remember reading this thinking, oh my God, I would be just livid, like pissed. And his 2 loyal dogs, were there. They were farm dogs. They knew how to work the cattle as well. And they're sitting by his side while he's just taking a break. And he says all of a sudden that blue orb just kind of makes its way out. And the dogs, with their intuition, get up and they start barking at it. And they go chasing after it. And he's yelling for them to come back. And they won't come. They're not listening to him. And so he says, all you could hear is just this non-stop barking. All of a sudden it stops. There's no whimpering, no crying, nothing of the sort. He goes to look, and he said that what were his dogs were now almost just a pile of goo. Almost like whatever this orb was turned it into some type of slimy substance. And those were his 2 faithful, loyal dogs. Once that had happened, on top of the UFOs, on top of seeing cryptids, on top of the paranormal activity, on top of losing heads of cattle, he reached out and he contacted some people who were in the supernatural type of field, and they were able to get in touch with this Colin Coward and George Knapp. Now, as I explained, George Knapp is a co-host for Coast to Coast AM. He's also a well-respected anchorman in Las Vegas on their news, one of their major news channels. And his claim to fame is he brought to light the Bob Lazar story, which is a story that I definitely want to get to. If you guys don't know much about him, let me know if that would be an interesting story you'd want to hear about, because I'm very, very familiar with that story. Don't take it at face value, and just because you may have seen one thing once, I've seen pretty much every video you could think of, almost every documentary made about the guy. Doesn't search or claim or want fame. He doesn't charge money to go and talk. In fact, he doesn't even care to talk about what had happened. He went to the media for safety, but somehow this George Knapp caught wind of what was going on at this Utah ranch and sparked the interest of a real estate mogul named Bob Bigelow. Now, Bob Bigelow is a billionaire with a B, so he has tons of money. And from all the crap that had been happening, and for Mr. Sherman knowing all the loss of cattle that he has taken to this point, he is not going to be able to survive. And so he decides to list the ranch for sale. Bob Bigelow, George Knapp, all of them go out there to this ranch, and investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe, who is awesome, she goes out to the ranch as well, and they document a lot of the weird occurrences that were going on, the mutilated cattle, which of course I can't show on here, They would catch these weird, just perfect circle objects in the ice of a river. They would capture odd footprints that didn't match any type of animal known. They had witnessed UFO activity, photographed it. None of those photographs have been released besides in the book, and that's not even everything that they caught. So when Bob Bigelow decided to purchase a ranch, he kept Mr. Sherman on as a caretaker. So this would supplement his income. He then went out and hired some of the brightest minds in science to find out if there was any validation of paranormal activity, just in general, not just on this ranch, but just in general. And the name of the organization was NIDS, the National Institution for Discovery Science. And this was completely funded by Mr. Bob Bigelow. Now, at the time, this was 1996. The technology, he was able to put up, some cameras, some security cameras at certain posts. The scientists would work around the clock, morning, noon, night, didn't matter. They would have, group A, B, and C working, night shifts, day shifts, you name it, just to see if there was anything that they could document. Now, a lot of the naysayers or people who don't believe that what happened at Skinwalker Ranch is real will say, oh, they never caught anything. That's why he ended up selling it. Well, he held on to the property for over 10 years. And whatever they did capture was divulged to the current owner, but they never came out and said or validated either way that they didn't capture anything or that they captured something. So a lot of the people who are skeptics about Skinwalker Ranch were saying, oh, this is just a story made up by, the Shermans just for attention. But this is just your average everyday farmer. He's not looking for attention, and he never was searching for attention. He didn't even want his name to be put out there, his family's name to be put out there. So you kind of got to put that attention starving crap in the back pocket, because that's not what was going on whatsoever. Whatever NIDS captured, they never released to the public. And Bob Bigelow is a person who is very, very interested in the paranormal, and I guess the all-around questions of, how's the best way I could put this? I mean, he believes in almost everything: ufology, paranormal, demonology. I mean, you name it. He even put up funding that if there was, truly the elixir of immortality, and if anyone had ever found it, that he would give them a big sum of money. So maybe he's afraid of death, maybe he's afraid of dying, who knows? But just wanting to capture and validate that whatever we are unsure of or we don't know about, but people have witnessed and have all described the same thing from continent to continent, there has to be something going on. So after Bob Bigelow decided to sell the property, he sold it to the current owner, and I believe his name is Kevin. I forgot his last name, but they have now created a new TV show on the History Channel, I believe, and he's invested even more money into finding out whether or not that this property has experienced these weird phenomena. I know on a couple of episodes, and I don't want to be a spoiler, so perhaps you guys should check it out, but they do capture a lot of weird, unexplainable shit. They also have a security team armed with, assault rifles, just in case of any, God only knows what, but Meanwhile, they also have 2 people staying on at the homestead who are, they kind of seem hippie-ish, but they're also paranormal investigators. By this point, Mr. Sherman, the owner who started to report all this stuff and where the book was, based off of and why it was based, off of this ranch alone, he had completely left the ranch after Bob Bigelow sold it. And now, like I said, it's become a TV show that, really attracts you with what they have found and what they have documented in a short amount of time. So it makes you wonder, what did NITS capture? What did Bob Bigelow capture? He never came out and said what he captured. He never has said that he, did capture something or didn't capture something. He just leaves everyone in the dark about it. But it's been, for those who, are believers, it's been frustrating because they, make their way up to this ranch and they are immediately stopped and, turned around because the new owners, of course, they don't want hundreds of people roaming around this ranch. But it's as if either one, this paranormal activity completely stopped, or 2, it's still going on and they are continuing to document this in a scientific manner. But we just don't know. So if it'll let me play the whole thing through, excuse me, I'll go ahead and play it. But I want you to get a good idea of who Bob Bigelow is. And this is from the Joe Rogan Show when he interviewed Bob Bigelow some years ago. That's how big of a name he became. Not everybody gets a chance to get on Joe Rogan's show, but because of Skinwalker Ranch, he started to make a name for himself. Some people started saying he became, he was the dumbest investor to invest in this property, but people don't know what exactly was caught there. So this is Bob Bigelow and Joe Rogan. Let me shrink this down here so you can see it better.
You and I have some shared interests, clearly, in the world of UFOs. But I want to talk. Most people know of you because of Bigelow Aerospace. They know that you're this billionaire investor and you're a very successful businessman. But you have a deep fascination with UFOs.
Yeah, sure do.
How did this all get started?
Back when I was about 3 years old, which would be about 1947, and actually of May of that year, my grandparents had a very close encounter that was dramatic. And they were taking an evening drive in the late afternoon up into the mountains and coming on back down to Las Vegas. And they saw what appeared to be at first an airplane on fire. And the object became closer and closer to them, and they pulled off to the side of the road. And at one point, then it filled up the windshield, and they thought they were going to die. And at the last second, it shot off and disappeared. And I learned of this story when I was probably 10 years old, and because I was 3 at the time. And my mother had told me this story. So I approached my grandfather, and he wouldn't talk about it. Now, after all these years, like 7 years have gone by, because I was intrigued with it. And so I went to my grandmother, and she only would say a few words, but she wouldn't talk. So I got the story from my mom, and my grandfather had to sit on the side of the road there in the car for a while to recompose himself, and because they thought they were going to die, and then he finally was able to drive on back to Las Vegas.
Now, I did want to give you guys a little bit more of context of who George Knapp is, of who Jeremy Corbell is. Jeremy Corbell is this man right here. He's a director of the Bob Lazar story, the documentary. And the other gentleman is George Knapp, the author of Skinwalker Ranch, co-author. A lot of this, and here on the upper right where you can see my cursor, this was one, and they do have the full episode, but Bob Lazar's story, if you're interested in wanting to know more about it, just let me know, because I've watched and seen and heard and read almost everything about this story, and I've come up with my own conclusion. If you guys are interested, that was a video I was going to make before this, but I felt like this one might have a wider reach. But here's a little bit of what he has to say, and I mean George Knapp, about the ranch and how everything came to fruition with Bob Bigelow being involved. Oh, man, sorry.
George wrote this book about a little place called Skinwalker Ranch, where the government was studying this property. That happened because of his book. Some DIA guys. Well, you should tell the story of.
I visited that place.
Yeah, but right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you got I think you got a little misled on it.
Tell him how the government study started. From your work. It's fascinating.
So some of it stems back to Lazar. So we did that story in the series in '89. One of the first people to call me after that was a guy I'd never heard of before named Robert Bigelow, a billionaire. He calls me up and says, I was really interested in that. I've been interested in UFOs for a long time. Can I help you? Meaning, can he help fund me? I said, I work for a TV station. I don't need any help. But he was not to be deterred. He then reached out to Lazar. They had he started meeting with him and pumping him for information. And that really amplified Bigelow's lifelong interest in it. He created something called NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, which he made a science advisory board of the best and the brightest in both the UFO field and the field of consciousness. So they're looking at two questions. Is there life elsewhere in the universe? Is it here? And do humans survive after death? And he assembled this board, former CIA guys, two former astronauts, men who had walked on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Hal Puthoff, physicists, psychologists, a brilliant little think tank to take on these two topics. I was allowed to be a fly on the wall for some of it, not all of it, but some. And I told Harry Reid about it. In 1996, and he said, can I go? And so he showed up and sat in on the meetings, and he was kind of hooked. Harry Reid was the first person I told about Bob Lazar outside of our newsroom. Before we aired the stories, I'd known him since he first ran for Congress in 1982. Then he becomes Senate Majority Leader. So he'd always had an interest in it, but he didn't want it to be known publicly. That does not help your reelection chances. So in 2005, we write the book about Skinwalker Ranch. NIDS, that team, bought the ranch. They were on the property for 7 or 8 years at that point and had hundreds of different incidents that they investigated. They approached it like scientists would. They looked for prosaic explanations. They looked for gravity anomalies. They looked for psychoactive plants. Could there be hallucinations caused by magic mushrooms or something? Are the witnesses lying? They investigated the background of the family that had lived there. And they found out that it could not be explained, all the range of activity there. So it was not only
What
UFO.
kind of activity we're talking
Well,
about?
it starts with UFOs because that's what got their attention. The Uintah Basin in northeastern Utah has always been a UFO hotspot. Everybody who lives there basically has seen them. Balls of light, orbs, structured craft, daylight, nighttime. In 1976, a guy named Dr. Frank Salisbury wrote a book about it, the Utah UFO Display, and he took hundreds of these cases that have been collected by the locals. There was a local science teacher named Junior Hicks who, because he had taught generations of kids science in that area, when people would see UFOs, they'd call up Junior Hicks. And he went and go and investigate them. And he had hundreds and hundreds of files. He gave them over to this guy Salisbury, who wrote a book about it. And he said, these are real,
So, mind you, this was in the 1970s when this all first started. It wasn't until, like I said, the purchase by the Shermans that it actually started to gain notoriety for all the weirdness that was going on in this ranch. He's talking about how many UFOs started being reported, and that is just for the people who actually had the courage to go and report them, because you got to remember, even to this day, a lot of scientists, a lot of people are not going to go and just report this because of the number one, skepticism, the ridicule, you know, your career being on the line. So there's probably hundreds of other, you know, sightings that were not reported. And, you know, it's kind of sad because you want to know more about it. But, you know, look at it in the past few days after the China balloon. You know, they blasted down over Myrtle Beach as of, you know, what, a week ago here in 2023 when this video is released. February, what was it? I might be off on the date, but I remember seeing the story on, was it this last Sunday, the 26th, 2023 of February? Anyways, a couple days later, I don't know if you guys are big into watching the nightly news. There were 3 objects shot down. Now, the government hasn't released what the objects were, but they did indeed say they weren't UFOs, or excuse me, they were not balloons. They didn't appear to be made from any, you know, known countries, but they haven't said what they were or what they are to this point. If they have, then I must have missed it, but that is extremely, extremely interesting. So here, we'll go on with a little bit more with George Knapp. So, mind you, I've read the book. This is verbatim from the book. So I knew, and I had already said about all this prior to me even playing this clip, verbatim exactly what George Knapp here, the co-author of the book, wrote about the paranormal poltergeist activity, UFOs, the cryptids, and all that. So that's that book is where that information came from, and he's just going over you know, his excerpts of the book. Okay, so I overly exaggerated, because I could have swore it was over like 5 to 10 bulls that got into this this trailer, but you'll hear it for yourself here, and then I'll go ahead and end it, because if you're interested, I would suggest this is a great show right here. Wow, that is interesting. That I do not recall. You know, it takes some energy to leave another metal magnetized. A lot of energy, in fact. And whatever could possibly do that is unexplained. I mean, mind you, there are no power sources around the area in which he had his cattle, you know, stored. But that is really interesting. So yes, that is the story of Skinwalker Ranch. If you would like to hear more from the horse's mouth, George Knapp, one of the co-authors, check him out on this Joe Rogan podcast. The full version, the 3 hour, 23 minutes, I believe, is up. But it's a very interesting topic. Very odd of the occurrences that took place there. And, you know, to have lived through that poor family, I just feel terrible for her. I mean, to be so frightened that you would have to, you know, you felt the most comfortable sleeping with your family all in one room. That would just be a horrible experience. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed and liked this particular topic. If you've known about this, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you didn't know about this and you're still interested, check out some more topics. Like I said, they've made movies, they made TV shows that are over-exaggerated, but the more you look into the people who were actually involved, like Bob Bigelow, George Knapp, you know, the Shermans, they never have ever made a public, you know, have gone out in public and said anything about this ranch. But the people who have, it's extremely fascinating. So, like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you guys are interested in hearing the story that also kind of ties into this with Bob Lazar. His is very different, but equally as interesting, if not even more fascinating than anything else. another guy who doesn't look for fame, who doesn't look for fortune off of the story that he went through. I was making a video about him before I gave up like part of the way and decided to do Skinwalker Ranch. But if you'd like to hear a story about that, leave it in the comments, let me know. But until next time, you guys watch over each other, get each other's back. When you see somebody in need, and if you can, help them out. I've been seeing some terrible things just lately. People just really not caring for one another, and it's sad because we're so just into our cell phones, just constantly looking down. And the other day I ran across this poor old guy who had fallen, and like 4 or 5 people walked past him and didn't even help him up. I'm like, what the hell is going on? So if you see anybody in need, help them out. That's just my closing. Stay positive, don't let anybody bring you down. Life already has its ups and downs, so yeah, just think positive. But until next time, thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate if you like, subscribe, comment, and do all that. That would be awesome. But until next time,